it down to the community. So without further ado, because we have a discussion today, a long discussion, and more people will join in later on. So I'll just introduce Gabriel to you all, and you can get into it. So yeah, Gabriel is an amazing designer here at Enyata. To be honest, Gabriel is a senior product designer, but he doesn't like you to add the senior product designer to his title because he likes to be humble, right? So I'm not going to say senior product designer, Gabriel, but we all know what you are. So you need to stop this kind. So he's a product designer, and he's quite amazing at what he does. So Gabriel will be teaching us all about design accessibility, design for accessibility, which is a very core part of design which most people miss when you're trying to design. And yeah, you heard me say he's a product designer here at Enyata, meaning most of the products that Enyata ships out for our international clients around the globe, Gabriel and his team like work on it to make sure that they are on par, the best product that you can actually have anywhere else. So if you've ever come across anything that any product that Yata worked on, you can see that the reviews have been good. The designs are always amazing. And that's because we have people who are talented like Gabriel on our team who give their best shots to product design. So yeah, without further ado, please with a clapping emoji, ovation, clap, let's clap, drop emojis while we bring Gabriel on stage. Hi Gabriel, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you, Precious. Hi everyone. I hope everyone can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you. The floor
All right.
is yours.
This emoji is too much. You guys is enough, I beg. Let's just take it easy. So yeah, today we'll be talking about design for accessibility. I think the blackboard hand is already raised. I'm not sure why, because I've not started.
I think she was trying to clap for you. Dolakbo, right?
Oh, okay. All right. So let me share my screen and we can get started. I want to make sure everybody can see my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So today we're talking about designing for accessibility, right? How we as designers, right, can create inclusive designs for users, right? Users with um wide range of abilities and disabilities, right? I mean that's something that a lot of junior designers, right, don't pay attention to, and today we'll just be taking a look at it, right? And then I'll be sharing, a few tips on what you can do when you're designing for these sets of users, right? And whatnot. So let's just start. So during the course of this workshop, we'll be taking a look at, just basically introduction to accessibility, right? Why accessibility is so important, understanding impairments, principles of accessibility, and then common misconceptions regarding accessibility, right? And the role as a designer, right? Um, and after we'll dive into, designing for users with impairments, we'll be focusing on, users with visual or hearing and motor impairments. Um, because of time, I would not be touching on, cognitive impairments, right? But hopefully we'll have time to touch on this maybe at a later time, right? Then we'll dive into that. And I'll just share like tools and, a little bit of resources that you can use, maybe not just for testing accessibility, but yeah, for basically like for accessibility, right? And then finally we'll have like our Q and A's and discussion sessions, right? So I want us to be like very quick with this, so we'll have room for questions and discussions as we go along um the workshop. So now basically what's accessibility, right? Accessibility is basically the practice of creating products that can be used by people with wide range of abilities and disabilities, right? Um, you're considering users with visual impairments, right? Hearing impairments, motor impairments, when you're designing for accessibility, right? So now the issue here is the keyword here is wide range of abilities and disabilities. So a common misconceptions when we talk about accessibility is designers think, oh, I'm designing for people that are just blind, people that are deaf, people that can't walk or can't use their hand, can't perform certain actions, right? But that's not like really the case, right? So as we go along, we'll get to understand. I'll get to paint more scenarios of people with visual impairments, right? Permanent scenarios and temporary scenarios. And as designers, we need to design for those set of people, right? When we're designing. So a not so fun fact is would be that there's an estimated 1.3 billion people in the world at this moment, right, that are living with one disability or the other, right? It could be a permanent disability, it could be a temporary disability, something that can be corrected, right? So there are a lot of people living with disability, right? What we want to do, we cannot leave these 1.3 billion people left out when we're building products, right? We want to try as much as possible to, include them in what we're building, include them in the solution that we're providing for users, right? And we want to give that sense of belonging to this set of users when we're building a product, or where they're using this digital product that we build, right? So just put this at the back of your mind, right? 1.3 billion people, that's a lot of people, a lot of users, right? It's not one users, it's 1.3 billion um users basically. Sorry, I think I moved forward so fast. Right. So now, why should we, consider accessibility when building digital products? One, like I said, it creates a sense of belonging and inclusivity, right? You want to include those 1.3 billion people into whatever product you're building, right? So now, imagine Twitter now, for example, when the product came out. Imagine they did not consider users with um, visual impairment, right? It means those people that are blind can literally not use the product. People with color blindness, people with low vision would not be able to use Twitter or other products, other digital products that we have around, right? So you want to create a sense of belonging for these users. Another is basically it helps your business build better digital products, right? And then it improves the entire user experience of the product, right? It expands your user reach. So now imagine I'm building a fintech product, or a lot of fintech products out there don't consider this 1.3 people, 1.3 billion people, right? You can tap into that set of users, right? You can tap into the set of users and expand your reach as a business when you consider accessibility, right? So, and in turn, again, it helps the company or the business generate money. I mean, that's one thing that we as product designers, right, we need to like pay attention to, right? How can we generate revenue for the business, basically? So it helps you target and expand that user reach, right? And again, there are regulatory compliance, right? So there are laws out there. I know there are laws in Europe, right? I think the European Accessibility Act, and there are laws in the US, right, that mandates businesses to make their product easily accessible, right? So if you don't want all this legal braha, legal wala, right? You want to that's one of the things, right? You want to make your product easily accessible, right? You want to comply to some of all these um, regulatory bodies when it comes to accessibility. So there are still others, right? But these are like the main ones we just touch on today. So now, like I mentioned earlier, designing for accessibility does not mean you're just designing for people that are just blind, right? Like I mentioned, there are temporary scenarios and there are also permanent scenarios, right? For visual impairment, a temporary scenario could be, total blindness, right? Or age-related vision loss, right? As you grow old and you get like really, really old, you get to lose like your sight, basically. The people that get to lose their sight, right? Um, those are like permanent scenarios when we're talking about visual impairments, right? A temporary scenario for visual impairments could be breeze blowing and dirt entering your eye, right? At that point, you literally cannot see, right? How would you use your favorite product if you can't see? Maybe eye injury, or you had like a severe eye infection and you have to see the doctor, and then you're wearing like eye patch for maybe for the entire week. Would that mean for that entire week I would not be able to use um the product or the digital product, right? That's like temporary scenario. Same thing applies to engineering, right? Um, Deafness, maybe the person probably cannot hear, or again, age-related vision loss um, could also be a permanent scenario, right? But a temporary scenario could be, say, allergic to swelling due to allergic reactions, right? Or you are in a public space where there is loud noise, and then you're trying to, say, for example, see a movie, um, and you can't literally hear what is been the movie that you're playing on your mobile phone, right? So those are like temporary scenarios that could be corrected, right? And there are areas, there are ways rather that we as designers can address all of these, and we can include each and every user types, each and every user that falls under each of these scenarios. Another one could be motor impairment, right? Say spinal cord injury, or the person can't, or the person has a stroke, right? The person can literally not move. So that means the person will not be able to perform certain action that normal able people can. Um, this person will probably not be able to use the mobile phone to maybe scroll or type, simple movements, right? And a temporary scenario could be broken bones. You go tomorrow now, you go out to go and play, say basketball or football, and then you broke your bones, or say you were involved in in an accident, right? And then all of your two arms are gone, right? How would you use your favorite products when you're in that scenario, right? Uh, let's pay no attention to cognitive today. I'm not going to touch on this, so you can discard what you're saying here, right? So now we have a full understanding of visual impairment types and what, right, and even hearing impairment and motor impairment, right? So now the principles of accessibility, right? According to WCAG guidelines, there are four basic principles of accessibility, right? One is perceivable. How do you want users with this impairment to perceive your product, right? Your digital product. How do you want them to be able to operate? Can they use your product, right, to perform certain action? um, is your digital product easy to understand, right? And whatnot, right? Can your product be used on multiple devices based off like preference of the user, right? That's why you see when we when we develop products, um, most cases you're seeing there's a web view, there's a web design, and then there's also a desktop design rather, and then there's also like mobile design, right? Can people access your product on whatever platform they want to access your product on, right? Um, we won't be diving very deeply into principles of accessibility, but what we'll be diving into the most is uh, you know tips and insights on how you can design for these user types, right? With these types of for users with these types of impairments. So again, some common misconceptions about accessibility is one, it's a designer job, right? Accessibility, even though we know it's a designer's job, right? It's not just a designer's job, right? You need to. That's why there's collaboration, right? Every other stakeholder on the team should be fully involved in this. You know, in this process, right? In the process of making your product accessible, not just the designers alone, the developers themselves, right? Even your PM, your POs, your QAs also, they should be fully involved when you're talking about accessibility, right? Um, the second one is designing accessibility means taking everything off a checklist, right? So I've heard designers say there are a lot of that checklist you just need to look out for and tick when you're designing for accessibility. Oh, color contrast. Oh, is that contrast enough? How is there enough contrast, right? Oh, yeah, there's enough contrast. They tick it off, right? But that's not usually the case, right? It's not just about ticking off a box and saying the product is accessible, right? You need to take like a step further, right? And test this product with these user types, right? With this set of users, right? That's why there's something called usability testing. You can test your product and see how accessible it is to the potential users, the people who would actually use your product, right? And then get feedback from them and iterate on the feedback that you've gotten, right? Again, some people say, "Oh, we can let's do this last and focus on what's important." Right? What's important is the functionality of the product. We're not concerned about accessibility, right? So that's a wrong thing. That you should, if you're in a team like that, you should be quick to call out those kind of scenarios, right? Accessibility is not like an afterthought. It's not something that you pause or you leave and go and view the product and come back and work on it, right? So it's something that you need to imbibe into your design process as you go along in executing or delivering that product, that digital product that you're building, right? So it's not an afterthought. Just get that have that at the back of your mind, guys. So the role of a product designer, right? One, you need to advocate for accessibility, right? Even though I've said accessibility is not is you shouldn't look at it as a checklist that you have to tick off. You don't look at it as things like a checklist you have to tick off, right? You need to still adhere to some of all these accessibility guidelines, right? Collaborate with your developers, collaborate with your stakeholders, right? Communicate with these guys. Um, it's very, very important, right? And then you need to understand the user needs, right? That was when I said something about testing or doing research, understand what your user needs, and then iterate based off like feedback that you've gotten from conducting this testing, basically. So now very quickly to the main domain, right? How do we design usable digital products for the set of users? So we're going to take it bit by bit, right? And we start off with users with visual impairments, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of users that, if they look at, um, if they access a website or they look at any digital product, right, this is what they see, right? These are users with very good vision, right? They see things clearly. Like me, I'm privileged enough to see, um, you know, to have very good eyesight again. But then again, there are users with, blurry vision, right? When they look at um, your products, they see this, right? I mean, this can be corrected, right? By maybe like use of glasses, and whatnot. You can correct this, right? But then you need to be able to design for these two user types, right? And again, there are users that when they see your your product, right? This is what when they access your product, this is what they see. What they see is total darkness, right? Because they're blind. How would you design for this type of users, right? One is the use of contrast checker, right? So for users with like very low vision, you want to, as a designer, you need to be able to design for these types of users, right? So now one thing you need to do is try to make sure that your designs have like enough contrast, right? And there are standards to this. There are tools you can also use. You can use contracts for example, right? Um, I think the minimum um according to the guidelines, I think the minimum is 4.5 to 1, right? So anything above it is good. So but there are plugins you can literally use, like use contrast. You can use this to check the contrast of your designs or element of your designs, right? By selecting, say, the background color and then the foreground color, right? A very good the second thing you can do is try as much as possible not just to use colors alone, right? When you're designing, you can use other visual cues like icons or shape to convey certain information. You can also use images, right? Together with your text to convey certain information during designing, right? So now for users that are totally blind, this set of users can rely on what we call screen readers, right? Um, so now you can this is one of the reasons why I said it, the role of it's not just the designer's role when you're talking about accessibility, right? You also need to work with developers and other stakeholders involved, right? And look for a way that you can incorporate like this screen readers into, say, your mobile applications that you're building or your digital product, basically, right? So he hates people who can't see anything, right? So the screen readers will literally read what is on the screen for blind users, so they can have an idea, right? They can perceive that information in the way that they can, right? And have an idea of what is being displayed on the screen, right? Um, Another thing is to use alternative text when um, you're designing. So, I mean, I don't know if you've been saying this since I've started, right? You would see a brief description, right, on the images that I've been using, right? It's just this also helps like people that are blind who can't see, right? So have an idea of the picture that is on the page, right? And whatnot. Again, audio description. Audio description is a very good example, right? I was seeing a movie the other day, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right? And this was a feature I noticed on Prime Video, right? I noticed that I was not hearing the the characters talk, but there was a voice that was just describing the step and everything happening in the movie in details. And I was surprised. I was like, oh, what's going on? What's going on? And then I figured out the feature, right? And I realized that this feature is something that would be very useful for people who are blind, um, people who can't see, right? Right. It's a feature that will be very useful. So audio description, you can incorporate this into your product also. Um, just few tips, right? Few tips. I've seen I've seen designers design um like this, right? If you look at this very button, so this is a button at the top here. If you look at this button, I'm very certain that 100% or 90% of people on this call would not be able to see what's written in this text, right? So one thing you want to do, even for users that have very good vision, right? They can also get affected if your product is designed in a way that is not accessible, right? Making things very um, legible, making things very bold so users can see it is also very, very important when you're designing, right? So like this tiny text, even I myself, I know I wrote this is a text or something. I can't remember what I wrote. I literally cannot see what's inside it. But if you look at this now, this is well bold. It's bold enough. You can see the actual text, right? Right. So you always want to use labels for your input field when you're trying to make your product accessible to users, right? Again, is um making sure there's hierarchy in what you're when you're designing, right? If you look at this typography ish, there's so many problems wrong with this. I can't see this text, it's too tiny, right? The line height of this is looking too clumsy, right? It's going to be very hard for users to users with certain impairment to read this. I might be able to read this, right? But then what's the assurance that if I test this with a different user, that the user will be able to make sense of what is written here, right? So you want to make sure that even like down to the font you use, the typeface you use, the font sizes you use, your line height, right? Everything typography is in check when you're trying to make your product accessible. So it's not just about, oh, color blindness. Let me check the contrast of this thing. Okay, yeah, the contrast is good. My product is accessible because a lot of when I started out, I was thinking that way too. I'm not going to lie to you guys. So I was thinking that way. Oh, so far the color contrast is good, and then it's easily accessible. And I will go and put, oh, I create easily accessible designs, and I'll start telling people that, right? So it's beyond that. It's beyond just looking at colors, even down to the way certain you know design elements are matters, right? So the matters, your typography matters, the way you convey certain information to users, not just blind users alone. All of those things, those little details, right? Those are like captions, right? But subtitle is basically just you know, say the movie, let's say for example now the movie is a French movie, right? They're speaking French. You don't understand French. How would you watch that movie as a user, right? I'm not deaf, right? Just don't understand um, the language that's include that user type into the product, right? So you could use like subtitles, right, that would translate what is being said into English, right? Um, Also, if you look at websites, you see that some websites they could be in German, and then there is that switch. You can change it to English, and then you see the content of the website is being displayed in English, right? So those are just like scenarios. Um, those are basic scenarios, right? So for users with impairment, you want to consider using captions and subtitles. You also want to consider using transcripts, right? So for someone, so imagine now this is Coursera. So Coursera, um, for users who are deaf, who can literally hear, they can see the transcript and read what is being said in the video, right? So those set of users are not left out um, in the grand scheme of things, right? You're in a way catering for users that are deaf, right? That will literally not be able to hear, and even users that are blind that can't see. I mean, they would still be able to hear from the audio, right? If they're not deaf, right? They'll still be able to hear. So this is another way you can cater for users with hearing impairments, like using transcripts, right? Another one is volume control. So imagine all your um products or your hardwares where always like it's always on the highest level. So you plug your earpiece now to your ear, and then it's on the highest level, it could cause damage to your ear, right? You want to give users the privilege, right, to customize volumes based off their preferences, right? Um, another very good example in terms of captions and subtitles is if you're in a workspace and you like for me now, right? Every day I have 1 hour break where I eat if I'm at work, right? In that 1 hour break, I sometimes want to watch a movie, right? I want to watch a movie, and then there is noise around me. Like there's a lot of noise around me. How do I'm not deaf, right? How do I how do I use my Prime Video or my Netflix? Um, that's when that's a good example of where subtitles or captions come into place, right? I don't necessarily have to even hear what is being said, right? I can read the subtitle or the captions on the screen and make sense of um and make sense of what the movie I'm watching is about, what they're talking about and whatnot, right? So that's just like a very good example. So you want to create like you want to design your product for those kind of scenarios, for this kind of users, right? In say in temporary scenarios or say permanent scenarios, right? When it comes to um making your products um accessible and inclusive, right? And giving having a sense of belonging for your product, basically, right? So for motor impairments, where one of the things you can do as designers, right, is to make use of very of large touch areas, right? We all have like fingers that are um fingers with different sizes, right? So if you look at this screen now, you would see that these two icons are very close to one another. This probably a size 16 pixel by 16 pixel icon, so they're very close to one another. If I were to click um on the art icon, I probably would click on the cat icon, right? Because my thumb is very big. I'll probably click on it, right? So one of the things you want to do, um, one of the things you want to make sure is you want to make sure that you have very like large touch areas around elements or designs.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is your thought so far on designing for accessibility? Is there something new that you've learned? Okay, I think I'll share maybe a case scenario. So, one time during Build Up, that's Enyata's community initiative, we once had an applicant who was, hearing impaired. Is he hearing or I don't know, one of the, yeah, either hearing impaired, and he would join sessions like this one, and he would type and say how, how is he going to, he was asking questions like very concerning questions, and I just remembered it as Gabriel was speaking, how so much design is not like done for to include those kind of people. So he was asking questions of how is he going to write the Inyata build up test, you know, how was it going to be for him, and thankfully it was, good. So when he joined calls like this, he has to like turn up captions, this Google Meet captions like this, so that he could hear or read whatever that was being said. Then for build up, we assured him that the questions are not going to come with sound. It's going to be text based, so you can actually read and then write. Do you understand? I think that was how we were able to solve that. Gabriel, you can continue with your session. I just wanted to share that while we were in the session. So if you probably have come across people like that, I think because society does not always design for them or include them when trying to design something. You can even see it with people with using wheelchairs. You put a staircase. How is a person that is on a wheelchair going to climb the staircase? There's no space for someone with, wheelchair, right? And there was also a video on Twitter that time where a lady had to lift herself. She can't work, and the lift was not working, and she had to drag herself up from ground floor in London, very dusty London, up the stairs because nobody thought to design for somebody like her. So very important discussion. Gabriel, please, you can go ahead and share your screen if you're back on.
I mean, if there are any questions so far, we can, start dropping them in the chat because I'm not sure if I hope Figma does not mess up again. So I don't
Yeah,
go
you can.
off the call.
Yeah, you can also just unmute yourself and ask questions, contribute to the discussion so that we can make it more interactive rather than trying because it's been a good discussion. And Gabriel is shaking says, I want to hear from you guys too. Have you come across those scenarios? Drop questions on the chat, unmute yourself and talk. That's why it's an interactive workshop session. The floor is yours now. Feel free to ask questions. Hi, Elizabeth. You can go ahead.
Okay, hi, good evening. Okay, so I have a question concerning the font. I think there was something was mentioned about font, making the fonts not to be too small. So my question now is because I usually get confused when designing, like what's the best font to use on a mobile screen when I know let me just ask my question. What's the best font to use on a mobile screen when you are like considering accessibility for like everybody? I don't know
Okay.
if that question like direct. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Elizabeth. So if you're designing for mobile tab and web, right? Um, for mobile screen, for example, now the minimum font I would say you should use when you're designing a mobile application would be 12 pixels, right? Try as much as possible to make it 12 pixels because anything less than 12 pixels would would be too tiny, right? I've seen people use 10 pixels, right? And then it might work depending on the type of font because 10 pixels for some typeface might look a little bit bigger than 10 pixels for a different typeface, right? So it depends on the typeface you're working with, right? And again, you're the designer. If 10 pixels looks small, don't use it, right? Stick to your 12, minimum of 12, right? For a web view, if you're designing for a web view, minimum of say maybe 12 pixels for captions or 14 pixels, 12, 14 pixels for captions, right? For an actual subtext that's the body of the text that people would actually read, stick within around 16 and 18 pixels, right? And again, there are materials that you can use to read up on these things, right? Like material designs, for example. There are guidelines that material design is owned by Google, right? So there are certain guidelines that you can you can you can just check, right, and see how some of all these, big top big tech companies are addressing this issue, right? But basically for mobile, I don't go anything less than 12 pixels for mobile screens. And I can share the
Yeah,
resources
thank
with
you.
you if you maybe after the call if you don't mind. But you can
Yes,
Google a lot
please.
of material designs, right? So if you Google material design, you should be able to see it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was talking about is that the touch area. Uh, I think there's a standard, right? Make it 44 by 44 pixels, right? So and then make sure that spacing in your design is really good, right? So that by the time I'm clicking this. So if you look at something like this first one, I can't click this art without clicking the cat. Even this one, you can see how small it is. But if you look at this third one, you'll see that there is sufficient space, right? There is sufficient touch area. If I'm clicking on this art with my thumb, I would not be eating on this card. All right. So you want to consider this when you're designing. Right. Also, another thing for people with motor impairment is you can use the way you can address this as a designer is to make use of keyboard shortcuts. Right. And again, like I mentioned, it's not just your job as a designer to consider accessibility, even the developers, right? Because developers would have to contribute to all of these solutions, right? So you can make use of keyboard shortcuts for people with um, very mid motor impairment where people that cannot really move or maybe like they can't use their muscles like their hand right that much, right? And then again, if you have like forms that are excessively long that you have to keep scrolling and scrolling because I've seen forms like that it's like you want to collect all the information about that user on one screen and then you keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. That scrolling can be tiring for someone with you know motor impairment, right? It can be stressful to their joints where I'm tired, my hands are aching me. Why do I have to keep scrolling? But then imagine you can break that long form into steps, right? And then the user doesn't need to scroll before they can perform certain actions or see certain things. That would make it easy for these users to use your product basically. Another one is assisted technology, so like voice command series, text to speech. I mean, most of us iPhone users these days, we can say, hey Siri, I want you to do this, do this, do this. For someone who can literally not move, can still use the mobile application by just using some of all this assisted technology and saying, oh, hey Siri, play me Davido away, right? And then the music plays, right? It just makes the experience easier for the users, right? Another thing to avoid is avoid um precise interaction. So like drag and drop when you're trying to you want to drag a file and upload a file, right? You can avoid those kind of very precise interactions. There were things like um 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 how do I put this? So you see some filter options that they'll tell you minimum value, maximum value, and then there's that scrollable um thing that you need to drag, right? You should avoid things like that if you're considering people with motor impairments, right? Um, Again, you need to avoid things like that basically, right? Um, Again, like I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this call, accessibility shouldn't be an afterthought in your design process, right? So design and build things around inclusivity and belonging. You need to constantly design your solutions and have them tested, by users, right? Have them tested by all of these users with, different abilities and, disabilities, basically. So they don't feel left out, right? So there's some like Precious rightly said about the woman in the wheelchair, right, that couldn't climb up the stairs, right? She, I'm sure the moment she got to that stairs, she looked and said, "Oh, this was not designed for me," right? Because there was no thought, there was no concentration into, there was no sense of belonging to the structure of say the building, right? If you go, if you I don't know, most of you that stay in Lagos, right? If you see some of this pedestrian bridge, you see that there are usually two sides to it. You're seeing the stairs and you're seeing like a very slopey um pathway, right? That slopey pathway is literally not for people like me with my two legs walking, right? It's for people with people on wheelchair, people that are disabled, right? For them to be able to descend or ascend up the stairs, right? So building things around this would give a sense of belonging to the users and say, oh, okay, yeah, truly, this product was designed for me, right? The designer thought of me, like I was literally in the mind of the designer when he was designing this product. That product like that you see, and you just say, oh, man, this is really, really mad. This person really thought of quite a number of things before, you know, pushing this product out, right? So it gives that sense of belonging. And again, always test your prototypes. Always test your prototype. If you are not strong on usability testing, right, you need to maybe we'll have a session that will talk about that, but you need to test your prototypes with your potential customers or your potential users, right? And find areas, right? Find certain faults, places that you feel places that you can iterate your product on basically, right? And you can only do this by getting feedback from these users. Tell them to perform certain tasks, see how easy it is for them to perform that task, right? Get their input or their take on those tasks, right? And then go back to the drawing board and act on it if they are if your users are experiencing issues, basically, right? So that's just literally what usability testing is all about. Trying to see how usable your products are, right? If you develop a product and then 80% of your users cannot use that product, it means you failed, right? You need to always go back and iterate on it, basically, right? I think lastly is just tools and resources. I mean, I think I mentioned something about the web content accessibility guidelines, right? So if you go to w3.org, right, you would see some of what these guidelines. I mean, it's a little bit too clustered up. There's too much information everywhere, but you can take your time and go through it, right? These are like standard guidelines, right? That you need to meet, that you need to pay attention to if you want your digital product. right, to be accessible by a wide range of users, right? There's also, like the conscious checking, like I mentioned, and then accessibility laws. If you want to read up on, accessibility laws, you can go to iable.com, and then you see some of these laws, right? Um, that some of these countries have put in place for businesses to make, their products more easily accessible, right? So I think that brings me to our Q&A session. If you have
Yeah.
any question to
Thank
ask,
you.
now would be the time to do that.
Thank you so much. Quite a very interesting session. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for teaching us today. Everyone, please ask your question. In fact, it's already 5 o'clock. So if you have a question, just say it now. You know, we're packing up over here. So please do also like drop your questions in the chat so that Gabriel can like answer you. Thank you. We'll just take one or two questions and we'll call it a day. If you don't have questions, then have a great weekend. Great. I believe Gabriel must have done a very good job. Also, someone has what is usability testing? How do you really test? Gabriel, can you help us with that?
Okay, so I'm going to give a scenario to this, right? So imagine you design um so let's say Piggyverse now, for example. You design the app, you're done with everything, right? You would have to test the prototype, right? You have to test your design prototype with actual users and see if it's something that people can use, right? If See if people can perform certain tasks on that prototype, right? It could be giving them simple tasks like say, how would you sign up on this mobile application, right? And then you watch them sign up, right? You see what they do. You could ask them, how would you send money or how would you save money on this application, right? And you watch them do these things, right? And then you're not just watching them, but you're taking notes of issues they encounter when they are performing this task, right? Um, and then those insights that you get, if say for example, a lot of users cannot find it very difficult to sign up because there's a lot of information that they have to submit. They have to upload documents, CAC, they have to upload that BVN. So you get that insight, right? And then you go back and fine tune your prototype to make it easy for your users, basically, right? So usability testing is just something you incorporate into your design process, right? To see how users can use your products, right? Can literally use your products. That's just it. And then there are ways you can do this. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's not a big thing, right? You can get users, right? You can get your colleagues, right, and tell your colleagues to test the prototype for you and see how they can use it, right? So that's a very easier way, and that's called guerrilla testing, right? If I'm designing at the office, I can tell my colleague and say, oh, please, how do you sign up? Perform certain tasks on this product, and you watch them do it, right? You could do like a virtual testing, right? So there are tools out there that can help you. You can upload your prototype to those tools, and then it generates a link, and you can get that link and share it with. You can share that link with potential users.
You guys have a lovely, lovely weekend. Thank you, Gabriel. Please say thank you to Gabriel in the comment section and do well to follow him on
Thank you so
LinkedIn.
much.
He's always been to.
Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
so much.
I apologize for the
Bye.
network issue again. Bye,
Bye,
guys.
No problem.
everybody.
Yeah.